All right, hello and welcome. My name is Wes. This is the World of Art and Magic podcast, where we talk with artists and creatives about their inspirations, whether that's in films, games, how it is that they got started with what it is that they're doing. Today, I have my friend Sean with me, the art mentor, aka the art mentor. Can you give us an introduction, Sean?
Yeah, sure. Hey, thanks a lot for that, Wes. So, just like you said, my name is Sean, and so I'm an artist. I've been doing this literally like since I was little, and to a little bit about like my own art. I really love the fantasy genre. I also like sci-fi and cyberpunk genres too a lot. And so basically, I've been freelancing as an artist for roughly the better part of a decade right now. And then aside from that too. My primary career, though, is in art education. So that's also like what kind of brought me into doing my YouTube channel as well. Is like once COVID hit, I had to teach kids from home, and that's actually like the genesis of my channel. And so that's when I started the Art Mentor. And so basically, I've been a high school art teacher for the last 13 years of my life. So I've just been just kind of growing, what I'm doing and how I'm able to teach art and how I'm able to share kind of what I've learned and my wisdom and just trying to give that back to the art community, especially for the young artists coming up right now. So I feel they really need it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like right before we started the podcast, and I guess we can go ahead and jump into this as a topic.
Yeah.
We were talking about how AI art has affected the mentality of the average artists. Like just from your experience of like dealing with high school students and then also dealing with people through your own mentorship, like um, what's the general reaction to this? Like what's the morale look like on the landscape of artists right now coming up?
Yeah. So I would say like the general overall ethos of like what's going on, just the overall pulse is for artists of all ages is just obviously there's a lot of disheartened atmosphere and really defeated attitudes towards it. We've been working on our crafts for years and years, and there are especially like a lot of young artists that I connect with where they have had this dream and they want to go into animation or they want to animate or they produce assets for like video games. They've always dreamed about, working on
Mhm.
the next Assassin's Creed or the next Final Fantasy, and they just kind of feel like AI just came and like stomped on that. So I've seen that happen. And I mean, it's like literally to the point where I've more than once had people say to me that they kind of feel like almost like there's just no meaning anymore to their life because it was
Mhm.
stolen from them. So I would say that there's a mixed bag of peanuts where people are feeling like that. But then honestly, like a lot of young artists I talk to, they're just like, this is a joke. Like this is not really at all what art's about. Like it just has no soul to it. So you've got people kind of on both extremes, I would say, with it. And I'm not really surprised. And that's honestly like one of the main catalysts for why I produce the content that I do about AI art because I'm trying to produce a counter argument for it. Whereas I'd say that a lot of other YouTubers, I'd say they react like highly emotionally. Not all of them, but I'd say a good
Mhm.
deal of them, especially since this is like a really raw topic for a lot of people, is that there's a lot of just reactionary videos to it instead of guiding videos to it. And that's just been my sole focus with it. It's just trying to give people an informed and wiser opinion from someone that's been a professional artist for a lot of years and been someone that's had the opportunity to work with a lot of different types of people in different facets of different art professional opportunities. What can you do with it and why is it important that we continue human made art?
Mhm. Yeah, I know you're aware of Zapata's video on the argument against AI images. I'm going to put it in the cards here for anybody
Mhm.
that hasn't seen it. But your stuff, it seems like it, like you said, it fits into that category of a guide of like what kind of actions can we take in response to AI art, because it is encroaching upon people's jobs. I have heard of some people saying that they've either incorporated it into their workflow, which I can understand that there might be an argument for something like that, and that's just going to be a part of it, especially with game design, right? If it's like textures or something along those lines. And then I've also heard other illustrators say that the companies that they worked for, as soon as they left, they didn't replace them with an artist. They pretty much took that AI art and replaced them with the AI program.
Mhm.
So your stuff is like more on the guided side of things. I like what Zapata has like a lot of information as far as like the legal stuff that's going on right now. Do
Mhm.
you know like much about the legal aspects of like where we're at in terms of the court hearings and whatnot? Because they just ruled something recently that was like you can't copyright an image. So that's one thing that goes in our benefit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so specifically on that, as far as what I know and from what I've learned is that yes, specifically you 100% you cannot copyright an AI image. Anything that's generated or that is created through image generation, so that's image to image or you're doing in painting, anything that's created just through that process is not able to be protected by the creator. We'll call it that. The user, as I would prefer to call it. And I definitely align with a lot of what Steven and similar contemporaries have said. I know Mark Brunet is another big name who's openly been like very against it. And
Mhm.
as far as what you're able to, just to set the record straight, like what an AI user can do, hypothetically, is if they were a professional artist that actually has like a solid set of skills, is at most what you're able to do is you're only able to copyright what you actually change in the image. So if you were to generate an image and then you were to paint over it, the only thing that you can legally own at this moment is just a change, but you do not own the entirety of the image, is the
Mhm.
specifics as I understand it.
Yeah, and for those that are not completely familiar with this whole thing and don't consider AI art to be like a big deal, what's striking about this whole thing is how these companies they just came in and started data scraping everybody's work, and they did it openly. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the main one, I can't remember the name. I can't remember the name of it, but they had a Kickstarter up for
Mhm.
it, and their Kickstarter specifically said that they were going to data scrape ArtStation, DeviantArt, and Instagram.
Is that Midjourney?
Yeah, I think that was Midjourney.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they said it in their opening statement that that's what they were going to do.
Hmm.
And it's just it's crazy that you can take this, you can have a company that just feels like whatever data that you put out there on the internet is now just it's a free use,
Right.
regardless of the impact it's having on people's ability to earn any kind of income.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And yeah, I full on agree with that. And I think that the biggest misunderstanding of those who are like really zealot supporters of AI image generation as it currently is right now is the concept of what an open source is. Because that is what the, I guess, if you want to call it their legal defense for what they've done and how they've scraped everything, is that they're going to claim that they only accrued all of their data from open source. But open source doesn't mean just because you put it on the internet that it is yours to take. That doesn't make any sense because literally that is still the creator's creative property. I mean, if you want to put this into another context, right? Like if you were to say, well, I want to be a parent, and you just go to a playground and you take a child, that is not legally yours. You are not a parent because you did that. Please, full of God, if you're watching this, do not do that. That will ruin your life. But like you
Right.
can you cannot do that in any situation. And I think that that's a major misunderstanding. And I would say that a lot of people that combat artists on the ethics of this, that's the major critical flaw in the rhetoric that's happening there. The other thing that, as somebody that does a lot of research, because I'm also a doctoral student, right now I'm currently in like my third year out of my fifth year of my doctoral dissertation research right now. And we discuss ethics a lot in research. And I think that people misconstrue what ethics are when it comes to research. And at the beginning and the outset is we have all of these AI companies that claim that this was for research. And I mean, just when you are going to imply or you're going to conduct any form of research, the number one thing that you have to abide by are the research ethics. And these were completely blown out of the water like I'm talking like with a freaking military gun. Like this thing like was from like a naval carrier just blown out of the water. Nobody cared about ethics whatsoever. And people confuse ethics and morality really quickly because people will think that, well, because the ethics to me as an AI user or just a whomever that wants to try it out and they'll say like it's just for fun, well that's not really what ethics are. There's actually a really well placed doctrine in literally every single form of research has this. If it's scientific research, if it is quantitative or qualitative research, if it's medical research, and when we talk about ethics, the number one thing that's literally copy and paste in every single form of ethical guidelines is the idea that there can be no harm to an individual that is a research participant. And the number one thing that people have to understand is that whenever you conduct any form of research, number one is you have to have consent. And where again, this combats the rhetoric of, well, this is all open source. Well, I would love to see the document of artists who consented to being a part of that. So that's a violation, number one. And then number two, what harm relates to in an ethical research guideline is that it cannot be of any harm to you physically, emotionally, socially, or economically. And I think that we have all four of those components literally being affected. And artists are feeling that right now, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like one of the issues it is that we have as illustrators and visual artists is we don't have any kind of like unionization, or we don't have any kind of like corporate, I hate to say corporate structure, but I mean, if you look at the music industry,
Oh,
as
yeah.
soon as as soon as anybody tries to like print a bunch of Dr. Dre and Snoop albums, like
Hmm.
you're gonna get sued into oblivion. But because it's a bunch of guys that have posted their stuff on DeviantArt and we're all just kind of scattered all over the world and
Hmm.
we don't have any kind of unification together, it's just free reign for them to just take all of this intellectual property from people and repackage it and sell it to other people for them to have fun with,
Hmm.
right?
Right. I think we
Yeah, it's
saw this and I mean, you're around the same age as I am,
mhm.
Wes. Do you remember Napster back in the
Yeah,
early 2000s? Yes,
yeah,
we saw the same. For everybody here that's not a dinosaur like us, Napster was the original like download music for free website, and that went down in flames fast as soon as every label came on board. It took about 2 years for it, but
mhm.
that got ripped down real fast. That was where you could download music and movies, TV shows. It was a thing in the early 2000s.
Yeah, and it's also kind of like this ethos, and I think that, we probably well, I know I definitely was a part of that at that time of the Napster age of just being like, "Well, I'm just gonna take the music off of I'm just gonna download a bunch of, music and movies and stuff like that." But then as you get older and you start to realize that the only reason why we think anything matters is because you actually put a value on it, and you are assigning that level of labor of value with the money it is that's being exchanged. It's like people, especially with the younger generations coming up, and this is something that I guess will always have to be reiterated in an environment that mostly exists on the internet, because I feel like so much of our mental space exists on the internet, right? um, the things it is that we have that are free, we don't assign them any value because they're free.
Hmm.
So it's yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than this idea that we could just put everything on the internet, keep it all for free, and somehow people are supposed to uh, you know make a living off of what they're
Right.
doing. Yeah.
And I think too that's what now comes into play when we're looking at Adobe Firefly, because that's the latest and biggest name right now for the I guess they're like the fresh challenger to Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and OpenAI's. We have Adobe Firefly, and their biggest claim to flame. Their biggest claim to fame is that they did produce an ethical AI. But however, though, when you really trace their steps, like they did everything that every other company did and just as bad. Are you familiar with how that went down?
No. What happened?
Okay, so basically, Adobe announced, I think it was about 6 months ago or so, that they were creating their own generative AI software, which they now it's rolled out. Anybody can use it that has the latest version of Photoshop in it. And so basically, it works just like all the other ones. I would say that it's a little bit more robust and it's a little bit more organic in like its text than Midjourney or Stable Diffusion would be. But the way that they did everything was that they claimed that it would be done ethically. And this is where, again, we have a misperception of what ethics are, because really what they did was they kind of did a little swap of what ethics and legality are. So legally, what they did, which they're allowed to do, of course, is in their user agreements, which is when you renew, you have to agree to their terms of service. There is a clause in there that said that anything that you do that's especially within their marketplace can be used in training the AI, but nobody really knew about it. And then I also, I remember it was around like, God, like 4 or 5 months ago, but I saw on Twitter there was this thing going around about, or X now. Does anybody call this X? I don't know, but like whichever Twitter X, whatever Musk wants to call it, right? But I
Mhm.
saw this thing going around about how you actually had to go in and opt out. And right now, if you were to go on and check for anybody that uses Adobe products like me, if you were to go and check in, you're automatically opted out. But that wasn't the way for a lot of months. And so they were gathering their data, and honestly, in the same exact like underhanded, scummy ways as everybody else. And I don't know if you're familiar with it now, but there's a lot of controversy around their artists too. Like I think the biggest name out there that's taken up a lot of big issue, and it's made its rounds around the internet right now, is Loish. Are you familiar with her?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw that.
So yeah, you saw that. So there are people who are generating lowish-ish artwork and images, and they're putting up on Adobe stock marketplace for purchase. And that kind of, again, that conflicts with what they said that they were going to do in creating an ethical AI image generator. So I think that no matter what, right now, like we don't have anything that represents what the vision of what AI said that it was able to do with regards to how we can do it and protect those who were utilized in order to develop the technology.
Yeah, this whole thing reminds me of listening to older illustrators that were in the game before us
Mhm.
that talked about how the stock catalogs, how that completely changed the illustration game, right? Like
Right.
at a certain point, it was like illustrators were. I mean, there were far fewer, but illustrators were getting paid very highly. And then companies started to put together these stock illustration books. And it would be like, well, you can take one of your illustrations it is that you have that you designed for some Hallmark card or something like that that you still have the rights to, and you can put it in there, and then other people can license that image and use it for whatever product it is that they want. And
Mhm.
it was another way for illustrators to make money, and it makes sense, right? It
Right.
makes sense why it is that people would do it.
Mhm.
Um, but it started to cut the legs out from underneath a lot of illustrators because
Right.
people started going like, well, then why do I need to hire an illustrator? I can just go through and I can pick, this generic image, and sure, it's very generic, but I don't, the person in charge doesn't care. They just care about the bottom line,
Mhm.
and that saves them money, and so that's what it is that they end up using. So if people think that that can't impact people's ability to make money, then you're very wrong because it
Mhm.
can.
I
Yeah.
think too, one thing that's really worth discussing, and I don't hear a lot of people bringing this into it, but it's something that I try and emphasize to people, is that yes, obviously, corporate greed is a very big and powerful thing. But I think that company culture is very different, and what makes a good company culture is a lot more defined nowadays. And I think that it's not just what I think, it's literally a very well established fact that the best companies in the world that are the best to work for and yield the best results are the ones that care about people first and foremost, and the ones that utilize their people and their teams. And what I think we're definitely going to see from the current like just surge of people trying to do something with AI and trying to make it work is you're going to see a lot of companies that were great go downhill. And I think we're going to see some more niche and indie companies fly up, like come up out of nowhere, because they are going to be focused on their teams. And the one thing that I always try and convey to people is that it shouldn't stop you from investing in yourself just because a company won't invest into you. Try to find some other ones. Like, this is a really great time, in my opinion, for you to look into, if you're like looking to get into commercial artwork, if you're looking to get into the game or animation industry, like, yeah, maybe you don't want to go for those huge companies that are hinting at using AI. Maybe you want to go for some more indie or some, second tier ones that are strictly going to stick to using groups of artists, because they are going to have a lot of great ideas that are going to propel their product to the top. I mean, if they're focused on how to create really outstanding products, look at some of the best, like most viral games. Like, look at freaking Undertale. That is like a Super Nintendo generation graphic game
Mhm.
at best.
Mhm.
And, it's made so much on so little. So I think that that's just, and there's so many indie games out there right now that I think embody this philosophy. So
Mhm.
this is why, again, I don't believe in any sense that like this is all going away. I think that it is going to go away, and it's going to redistribute all of that talent elsewhere to
Mhm.
other people and other endeavors, and that's where it's going to be. And I think that an unfortunate folly of a lot of businesses is that they're going to attempt to get into this only to learn that it didn't promote their product as well as
Mhm.
they thought it would. Like, let's say that you were part of a company and they just slashed the art department and they saved $1 million, but the next product fell short $10 million. What was the point in that?
Yeah, totally. I think that so much of this, what's so interesting about this time that we live in is we're seeing these paradigm shifts happen like so quickly in the
Hmm.
way that things move. And I think what it is that we're going to see is, even though you're going to see there's going to be a couple of different shifts happening. On the one end, the bridge that illustrators have to make from like doing the small jobs to get into jobs that are like actually able to pay the bills, that's going to be, people are going to have to figure out another solution for that period of their career. But once it is, if you get to a point where your stuff is serviceable to a team and you're working with other people, like you said, on a game or something along those lines, it
Hmm.
really doesn't seem like it's going to encroach upon any of that. Because when you look at like one of the things Zapata talked about was this idea that what's going to happen to the Kickstarter market if everybody can just kickstart their own AI generated uh, playing card deck or something like that. Just generate a bunch of images, slap them on some cards, and then put it on Kickstarter. It doesn't work because already the mentality, the atmosphere around all this is changing so quickly that people thought it was fun at first, and then artists started to talk about the legality of it, and now it's going to start to get to a point where it's just going to seem cheap. Like, Kickstarter says uh, you have to document what it is that you generated with AI in
Hmm.
whatever it is that you do. You cannot just create a bunch of random stuff and put it on there.
Hmm.
And so, like, these companies are reacting to it. Like you said, the companies are reacting to it. This talent is going to be redistributed, and the companies that are going to jump on it, I mean, it's really going to be like them jumping on their own sword in a lot of ways. Like, could you imagine if like Magic the Gathering decided to fire Carl Kapinski and
Yeah.
just start AI generating their images? Like, they would be shooting themselves in the foot, because the big allure of getting a Magic the Gathering card that was painted by Kapinski is being able to take that card to him and have him sign it or sketch on it,
Hmm.
or to go and get the original painting it is that he did
Hmm.
for it. Like, there's so much more involved in this marketplace of being an artist, that
Hmm.
even though this is creating a lot of problems, it seems like this is the best time to be an artist, period.
I agree with that a lot. I really resonate with that idea and that concept. So I think that the majority of my channel that you'll find is about like freelancing and how to break into this and how to be a successful artist. And I mean that from an economic standpoint, but also just from a personal standpoint too, in your development as a human being. And so I've been doing freelance commissions, I think, for longer than a lot of people have.
Mhm.
And with that, I've just kind of learned this one simple fact, which is that people don't buy art for an image, and people don't pay really respectable sums of money for an image. What they are paying for, as I always assert, is an experience. And that is what you're providing for them. What you're providing, like when I work with a client and I do my check ins and they get to see the development of it. I guess for somebody that's not a parent, or if you are a parent, you can understand this, but it's almost like when you're like getting when your spouse is pregnant, or when you're pregnant and you're like going in for those little check-ins and you're checking the heartbeat, and like that's literally like that check-in, that is like the heartbeat of their idea, and them being able, the client being able to connect to you as an artist, and you being able to interpret that and bring that to life. And man, I have to say, like, one of my favorite things that I personally like to do is I like to like present a better version of their idea, and that's where like the artist really comes into play, is because we have that intuition that we built over time, as far as what we know that we can do and where our experimentation lies and what aesthetically will and will not work, where we're able to bring that idea, we're able to like hone it and refine it, like a really fine sword, like we're able to temper that idea into something that's even greater than what was initially proposed. And I think that that's what you'll see with the best IPs. And when it comes versus an a a machine generated image, okay, just when I look at this from, and I am coming this from like a researcher standpoint, but objectively there's absolutely no backing to call anything that a machine generates, or through the assistance of generation, art. Like, and I'm not trying to be like that Luddite person or anything like that, because as soon as you say like, oh, I'm not into AI because I don't believe it's art, like immediately everybody assumes it. But I'm just gonna tell you, like, I grew up before Photoshop really became the thing, and then Photoshop came out. I was like, okay, that's cool. And then 3D sculpting came out. Okay, that's cool. And then now VR sculpting was like the latest thing after that. And I was like, okay, that seems pretty fun. But as soon as AI came out, I kind of paused on everything I've learned, and I'm like, I don't think that this really defines it. And people don't understand. I think a lot of people are under this assumption that any image constitutes an artwork, and that is absolutely empirically false. There is absolutely no credible source, no authority within the art or education scope that will support that thesis from my research.
So whenever you're talking with your mentees about
Mhm.
the situation, since we're gearing this podcast around this specifically,
Mhm.
and it's so relevant to everything, what what do you see as like the tipping point? What is it that you say, or that you help your mentors realize, that sticks out to you, that it turns that light back on, and then they can act again on that creativity? Because I mean, yeah, I have my own perspective on it, but yeah, I want to hear what your take is on that.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a wonderful question. I think it's something that like every artist should really be asking themselves right now, is how do I stand out against it? And I think that first off, you have to have a little bit of a paradigm shift about what AI is, and don't see it as like a big scary boogeyman. Don't see it as these are like, the four companies are like the four horsemen of the apocalypse coming to like just ruin you in your
Mhm.
life right now. That's not the case. I want you to just view it as another competitor, as another challenger. But one thing that I always impart to everybody, that whether or not they're watching my channel or they're in my mentorship, is I really try and pull out, and specifically on my mentees, like, what can you do that machines can't? I actually made an entire video about like how you beat AI art, and there's like 10 things I identified that like I don't think will ever be able to do this, because they're too uniquely human. I'm going to say that amongst everything like that trumps all aspects of art is storytelling,
Mhm.
because when we talk about what actually attracts people to an IP, to a product, to an artist, it's your ability to convey a story. And the foundation of that, and the foundation of creating an artwork versus creating an image, is your ability to establish a human connection. That's not to say that you have a reaction to something, but literally you are forming a bond with another human being over a set of circumstances. So when you as a creator, you're establishing this scene where there is like this chaos and disorder, and then your viewer that you're making that for, if that's going to be, the gamer that's going to try out your game someday, or just, the person that's going to hold your Magic the Gathering card in their hand and be like, oh man, this guy's sick, like they're going to get some type of emotional reaction from that. That is the number one aspect that machines don't understand, because machines don't understand emotion. And if we lose sight of that, then we lose sight of what art actually is. So we really need to keep this perspective of the fact that there is so much that we can bring to the field that machines just won't get. And to assume that a machine can put something together in the same way that a human being can also defies what imagination and creativity actually is. And the one thing that I have found through my research, and that I have certainly experienced through myself and through working with my students, my mentees. Like, I've literally taught in person like thousands of students throughout my career. I've got a bunch of people that watch my YouTube channel like all the time and stuff. And the one thing that I always will say is that it's through your process that you come up with those great ideas, and through your own lived experiences. And you can't assume that just because, even if your data was ripped and trained on, it doesn't understand it. All it understands is the pixels on it. It does not understand what you put into that. It only understands it on a very vain level, and not a human deep level of understanding of why you made that and why that hits home for so many people.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. From my perspective, if I could add to that,
Hmm.
I look at all of this, especially the fantasy and sci-fi genres that I'm a huge fan of as well. I look at this as a spiritual thing,
Hmm.
and I see the journey of being an artist as it's a spiritual thing, because you're asserting yourself in the world in a time when people are telling you that what it is that you do, it's not going to make you money, or it's a waste of time, or whatever. But it's something that's deeply connected to your heart. And when you go down that path of following your heart, your life becomes so much more enriched than if you were to go down the path of just like working your normal 9 to 5 job, or a corporate structured setting, or something along those lines.
Hmm.
And so I think that so much of it is like it's a transformational process, and it has to do with, like you said, with storytelling. So much of what it is that we do as human beings is storytelling. And so if we
Right.
look at the story it is that we're telling ourselves whenever we're looking at AI art, and we're saying like, oh, well, AI art uh, can do all these different things so much better than what it is that I can do. If you really look at the story it is that you're telling yourself, it's not serving you in any way, in the way it is that art is supposed to be serving you, because it's supposed to
Mhm.
be in your life to serve you first.
Right.
And only because it has served you, and it has nourished you, and it has helped you grow, how then from that place you've been able to offer that skill to somebody else as a service, right?
Hmm. Yeah, totally. I full on agree with that a lot.
Mhm.
And the one thing that I would say that I've always kind of recognized, especially more recently, it's come to the forefront of my mind a lot, is
Mhm.
that the more that you grow as a human being, the more that your art evolves alongside with you. It's not just, and I think that that's a big missing component of what a lot of people talk about and they think about as far as, well, what's going to make me a better artist? It's going to be loads of practice. It's going to be more tutorials. It's going to be more courses and more classes. But like the number one thing that's going to help you progress is yourself as a human being. And then by diving into your artwork and progressing through your artwork, you're going to develop as a human being too. Because the arts are a humanity, and that is very exclusive. Like, there's no other species on planet Earth that creates art, and
Mhm.
that's really unique. Yes, of course, you'll see like, oh, here's like a seal painting or like a monkey painting, but it's not the same. Only human beings are really capable of doing this. And I think that you learning, and especially I say this to like young artists or like artists struggling right now, but you learning what is unique about what you have to say is infinitely better than how well you draw it or you paint it or you sculpt it or you digitally paint it. All of that is so irrelevant. And if you disagree with that because you look at what Stable Diffusion or Midjourney can pump out, I can't tell you a single professional artist in the world who would agree that your rendering is like the king as far as what people look for. Because I would say in this current era, like you have people that make super, super simple artwork, but they get loads of eyes and attention because of what they're able to offer and that journey that they take people down through their story, and through their IP. And I think the one thing that people will, perhaps be jaded about as far as what AI may or may not be able to do. I don't think it'll ever be able to do anything that great. And it just kind of reminds me of this discussion I had with one of my mentees once, and he's making his own graphic novel, and we had this discussion about his character design once, and he showed me like all of his concepts, his iterations, and I said, "Hey, these kind of all look the same." And he said, "Yeah, well, I know, but he's kind of like not a big character. He's kind of forgettable." And I said, "Okay, well, let me ask you this: do you want your story to be forgettable too? Because I think that you should approach every level of your design with that same level of care." And this kind of combats the current rhetoric right now of um, anything that an AI will spit out will be good enough. And I'm just going to tell you that, like, and I think you know this as a creator too, is that you put a lot of pride and you derive fulfillment out of challenging yourself, right?
Mhm.
So, with that, like, if you only put out what is good enough, I think that the other term for it you need to be familiar with is mediocrity, because that's really what it is. And do you want to produce mediocre products or do you want to produce legendary products? There's a lot of people that are really afraid of being a legend instead of just putting in that work. They're afraid of like pushing themselves to that level because of what they think that they're going to have to do to get there. But I'm going to tell you, like, in this age, like, you being able to do and bring out like what a lot of people are afraid to do is really going to set you apart. And AI is definitely a big stimulus to help a lot of people figure out what that special component of their life is. And it doesn't matter where you grow up or what you do or you don't have access to, like, everybody has a story. And if more artists can figure out how do you relay that story, that is what's really going to set you apart, and it's going to open up a lot of doors and opportunities for you.
Yeah, and it's also one of the other things that is that this reminds me of is that we have these two different mentalities. You know, we have this mentality of competition and creativity,
Hmm.
right? Like, and we have to wear different hats as creators. You know, we have to wear a business hat and then we have to wear a creator hat. And
Hmm.
it's understandable to look outside of ourselves and to see other artists and be like, oh, okay, you know, this type of artist draws like this. I need to be able to be this good in order to do that. That sounds like that makes sense, but it really doesn't, because every individual artist has their own lane, and you're not going to find that by looking at the person next to you. So the example that you were giving of somebody saying, "Well, I designed this prop or this background and it's good enough." That also reminds me of this kind of mentality that we have to grow out of of being oriented towards looking for the job, right? Because
Hmm.
that's kind of the mentality we have whenever we're looking at these game companies or we're looking at these movie companies. If we're looking at them and we're saying we need money from them, I need a job working with them, that's not necessarily going to bring out the creativity in you, right?
Right.
Because you're more concerned about, like, okay, is it good enough in order to get me this job, rather than is it connected deeply to my creativity? And
Hmm.
if it's connected deeply to that creativity, then it's something that really can't be replaced. Like,
Hmm.
as soon as a client comes along and sees it, they have to, like you said, if you build that connection with them and you're helping bring a voice to something that is inside of them that they want to express, but they can't do it, whether that's because they're not a writer or because they're not an artist. You're bringing that out of them. There's that human connection, and that human connection is priceless, and it's directly connected to storytelling. Like I was
Right.
saying earlier, you know, like, what is the story it is that you're telling about yourself, that you can look at AI art and be like, well, you know, this can easily replace me because it can create this image. But the truth is that we're so much more than just image generation devices. Like you said, we go through these personal transformations, and then we take that personal transformation and we put it into our art, and
Right.
that connects us with other people on a deeper level.
Hmm. And then along with that too, I'd say another thing that you kind of have to bear in mind right now is that what the threat of AI, I believe, isn't really that much of a threat, but I think that it could hold with it actually a lot of redistribution of power right now for those that want to go full force into it versus the ones that don't. And I think that everyone watching this right now, you've definitely like, haven't you watched a show that was like incredibly high budget, super great visuals, and just fell short? Like it was just total garbage.
Right.
You played the game and you're just like, I mean, that was flat. Like if I had a saxophone, it would just be like, brrr. Like it just
Yeah.
full on just fell flat of expectations.
Mhm.
And when you think about which ones are doing the best, it's because of that. Like they give audiences something to pause on. And like Maxine Green, who's a very prominent um, philosopher for art
Mhm.
right now. She's a scholar on art, and she talks about lingering, and that's a really important part of what makes something a really great artwork. Is not just your ability to see it and go, "Aha, that's nice." It's your ability to stop and linger in it and really ponder both like yourself as a human and like as a participant viewer in that, but then also too as like an artist, like they're thinking about the person behind that. Like I think the what makes an artist so extraordinary is when you look behind the image and you see just a mountain of effort. It's almost like I mean, it's so it just it doesn't make sense to me, but it's such a contrasting opinion. Like look at a professional athlete and how much we glorify this in the
Mhm.
US. Like if we have a professional like football player, basketball player, you know, your Tom Brady or your Kobe Bryant, and we just absolutely idolize them and the mountains of hours that they put into it, and they were the best and they put in insane efforts, and we look to that. But then you look at it nowadays as an artist, and it's like the AI community will straight up make fun of you or put you down or say that what they generated in 5 minutes is better than what you did in 15 hours. And I'm like, that's so messed up and wrong. Like
Yeah.
it's not something that you should do. You can't think, and I guess just to bring it home, what I'm saying is that you can't have the assumption that speed is quality. Because if that were the case, I mean, then yes, it literally would be over. But how many AI users right now have? It's like I'd say the biggest red flag for me, as far as like when I look on somebody's like Instagram page or their DeviantArt page, and I'm like, is that a real artist? I'll look at how many they've done and what span they've been a user for. So like on DeviantArt, it'll be like, oh, you've been a user for 6 months and you've created 1,643 images. I'm like, no, like unless you've been like a hermit for the last 25 years, I don't think that's real. And part of the reason that I think that the AI user base is going to struggle, and they currently do, is the lack of curation. Because with you as an artist, like you think in depth about every part of your artwork and what you like and what you don't, and what you do want to display and what you don't. Versus, I see a lot of AI users put out just everything, and they hope that just this mass flood of stuff is just going to bring them what they want. But I mean, what you're finding right now, and I mean, this isn't my opinion, this is fact, it's that AI images are worthless. Like they fetch less than your lowest level commission because it has no perceived value. But the thing I want to let people know is that AI has actually increased the value of human generated work. And that is to say that with human artists, pricing for you as an artist has gone up. I have seen this personally. Like I can personally say that I have tripled my pricing around the time that AI came out. I
Okay.
can personally say that I've gotten more clients than ever. I can personally say I've got more business than I ever have since AI came out. I've also
Wow.
helped in my mentorship. My mentees have experienced this too, where I'll work with them for like a few months and they'll double, triple, quadruple the pricing because of this fact that there's a lot of people that don't want to work with this. And yes, there are a lot of people that are flocking to it that used to be clients, but I always caution this is that the people that flock to it aren't the people that you want to work with. Just because somebody will hand you out money to make artwork doesn't mean that they're a good fit for you. It doesn't mean that they're a good fit for your future or an investment of your time, because a lot of clients that, or if you want to call them clients, some of them would only pay you like $10 to $25 for artwork. And I'm like, you can make that at Chick-fil-A. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think that's a good investment of your time long term. You know, if you need to take a couple cheapos to get yourself going and started, and honestly, like at that point, like you're really looking for validation, and I get that because I've done it too when I first started out years ago. Like I did some cheapies too, but then you gotta price up, and you gotta level up your respect for yourself too. And that is to say that AI just it doesn't have, because it's so available to everybody, it doesn't have a high perceived value. It has a very low perceived value because anything that's readily available to everybody is relatively worthless.
Yeah, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier about like this whole mentality that everything should be free on the internet.
Mhm.
As soon as you put something like that in that place, then it naturally falls into that space of people being like, "Oh, well, this has no value."
Mhm.
Um, so to so we'll go ahead and we'll wrap this up here, but I have like one more question,
Sure.
and I think we can trade off on this.
Mhm.
So from your videos, I've gotten like a lot of tips as far as like finding freelance work and stuff like that. And I really appreciate how generous you are with like talking about how it is that you find work. And so I'm curious if you can give
Mhm.
us like maybe a hint or two or a couple of tips on what it is that you're looking at now or what has been fruitful for you. And then I have a couple I'd like to share as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for asking me that. I guess what I'll kind of share right now are a couple do's and don'ts, okay? Because one of the things that I have long noticed, and I think this has really been, I guess, the catalyst for a lot of my videos that have helped a lot of people, in fact, get jobs or get their first clients, is the fact that when you look at most freelance artists on a lot of big websites, I'm talking DeviantArt, I'm talking Reddit, I'm talking Instagram, I'm talking what else is really big? Like artisan clients. Talking about a few other ones. I just can't think of the names right now. Is that most of them don't have a good decorum as far as how they're conducting themselves. And with that, I think that that's like the number one thing that I try and supply people with on my channel is like, here's how you should post and here's how you should go ahead and try and promote yourself or respond to clients in a thoughtful way. So I guess here are my biggest tips for you is number one, don't use a commission sheet. Commission sheets are just a bad idea. In fact, the one thing that I've always advocated on, especially for the last few years, because this is literally my practice, is I don't think that you should list your prices at all. I think that the number one thing that people should fall in love with, and this is just in line with what you and I were talking about, Wes, is your artwork. Like get people to fall in love with your artwork and then have them DM you, email you, whatever mode of communication you feel comfortable with. But for me, it's personally a DM. And I'm going to have a human conversation with you. I'm going to get to know your project. I'm going to get to know the intricacies of it. I'm going to get to know the level of detail that you're expecting. And from that, I'm going to derive my pricing from that. And then that sets you up for a less transactional experience. And therefore, you're going to immediately get the client a lot more hooked and more apt to close. Because I'm going to tell you, this is going to give you a much higher close rate than just slapping out your pricing. And I say that too, because I don't know about US. Have you ever worked on something that you feel that you were underpaid for?
Oh yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
that sucks. And I've been there so many times where I'm like, I'm slaving away at this thing. Like, I hate this. Like, I'm so stupid. Like, I really wish I priced myself up for this one. So that negates that. The other thing I would say is that you need to have relevant examples. I cannot tell you how many times, and I like laugh about it in my videos about it just to like kind of bring some humor into it. But people will be posting and saying that they want fantasy work or any it just insert genre. If it's they want to make Pokemon trainers, if they want to do cyberpunk characters, they want to do sci-fi military characters or Star Wars fan art. And then what are their examples? Okay. Here's a portrait of the guy from Breaking Bad, and here's a furry artwork, and then there's like, my not safe for work lady up over here, and then like, oh, here's like um Ahsoka. Like none of these make sense. So you have to have relevant examples. And the one thing I always say is like you should have at least three. Like if you have three relevant examples of any particular genre, that's it. And then that ties into this topic too. You have to know your niche. I would say a major flaw in people starting out is that they don't want to niche down. And what they'll instead be, I guess, um, just nudged into the direction of is casting a wider net. Like that's going to do you good. So a lot of people have really wide nets and they don't catch any fish. So my philosophy that I teach people is no, sharpen your spear and nail that. All right. It's better for you to have one singular focus. And like for me personally, a lot of people don't know this, but like I started out in doing a lot of like military characters and military illustrations. And then now I branched out into doing fantasy because I got enough work from there. And then I was like, okay, I feel pretty fulfilled on this niche and I've got some experience on my belt. Now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to expand. So I think that what you should do is you should narrow down to one niche and one niche only that you really, really love. Like whether or not you were getting paid to do it or not, you just love it. Go into that and then expand out from there because you can't conquer the world by waging war on every country. Like you need to conquer one nation at a time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess the thing it is that I've learned in this last year or so of like focusing on doing my own projects is that you never know the end result of doing personal projects and connecting with other people in very genuine ways. Like that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons why I started doing this podcast. Like I used to run a blog where, and I still have a blog now, but I don't do it every day. But I used to have a blog where I would take like a painting
Mhm.
and I would just break it down into the compositional elements. And I would just write one of these blogs every day, just as a way to learn like elements of composition and color and things like that. And I had opportunities come out of that. I mean, I had
Mhm.
actually a writing opportunity that I never expected, just interviewing artists on a website called, it's actually a artist website called Bombing Science.
Mhm.
And I've been doing that for the last few years. And that's an easy example to me of like, if you just put something out there, even if you put in something out there to educate people, or you do like a podcast where you just bring other people on and you try to promote what they're doing, or you do like a comic or something else, then
Mhm.
you're putting yourself into like another bracket because there's so many people that like again we're looking at the marketplace. We're looking and being like, okay, I want to be a character artist. And so let me do the character art thing. That's understandable. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, like what you said, niche down, right?
Mhm.
At the same time, it's like there has to be something else there that is separating you in terms of the way it is that you're, like you said, you're conducting yourself online. Um, it reminds me of like one of the tips that I heard from Dave Raposa, where he was saying
Mhm.
that he takes inspiration from three different sources, right? So he has
Mhm.
two sources that are similar, and then he has one that's dissimilar. It's kind of like throwing in a spice into whatever it is that he's doing. And
Mhm.
I feel like that's kind of the same thing with what it is that we're doing. Is like, how are you going to how are you going to put yourself out there in a way that's actually going to grab people's attention?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I give an example of just a bounce off of what
Sure.
you just said about creating
Mhm.
opportunities and you don't know
Yeah.
where it's going to go?
Yeah.
So I started my mentorship a year ago and I started out like I advertised on my YouTube channel and I advertised on my Instagram page. And I remember like for anybody here that's thinking about like, well, I don't know if this will ever work out and this art thing will ever work out. I would just encourage you and tell you that like just have a good sense of blind faith in yourself. Like you don't know if it's going to work out, but I always say like if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So like I put out those posts like, hey, I'm offering my mentorship. I'd love to work with you. If if you're interested, like DM me. And ironically, the first person that ever entered my mentorship was one of my students. I taught her in high school 5 years ago. And like she was I moved when she was a sophomore. And so then when I started my mentorship, she DM'd me and she was like, hey, Sean, like, I'd love to be in this program. Can we talk about it? And
Mhm.
that's how my mentorship started. And like, just to your point, because of the fact that I had that relationship with that student, like they knew that I was going to be somebody who could be of service to them. And if you view yourself as an artist as not just a product, but also as a service for humanity, I think that you can really set yourself apart. And I kind of pour myself into this mode and this mindset a lot, as far as like, how can I be of service? How can I be of value to people? Whether or not you're creating your own comic, like I don't think that it's sustainable for you to just be like, I'm gonna make the best comic, I'm gonna make the best money, I'm gonna be rich off of my idea. Like, I would encourage you instead to be of the mindset of, okay, how am I going to be of service to people? How is this going to help people? Like, what value am I going to bring to other people's lives? Because that puts you in such a great, like I would say, like 1% of artist bracket who are really going to make it and really going to try and make waves, and they're going to get themselves out there and known so much more than people that are just solely focused on money. Because I would identify, it's funny, I just recorded like a whole video this morning on like toxic arts habits, and like being money focused, I think, is a very toxic habit. It's not just for art, it's just for anybody in general. But if you're only making artwork for money, I'm just gonna be real with you, like there are better fields you can go into and better things you can do with your time. But like, if you're only making artwork for money, I'm going to say that you probably need to reevaluate where your heart's really at and what you can actually bring to the world. Because I think you can bring a lot of great things. What do you think about that, Wes?
Yeah, definitely. Money is just it's a byproduct, and it's something it is that we need, and it's understandable that we're so fixated on it with everything that's going on in the economy and whatnot. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's not to denigrate anybody's need to make money, but it has to come from the heart first, because that's really where the true wealth is. It's not in this physical, it's really not in this physical plane. I mean, and if people listen to that and they might think that that's kind of woo woo, but like whenever you're doing a piece that you love, the piece that you've done that you look at and you're like, wow, I can't, it almost feels like I didn't even do that piece. It was like something was coming through me. And
Yeah.
that's the thing it is that you're hungering for. You're hungering
Mhm.
to reconnect with that source that seems that is just, it's the source of the creativity that you see all around you in the world. And
Yeah.
that's what it is that we want. We want that connection. And you
Mhm.
can't get that if you're like, well, okay, I want to get a job working for Marvel, so let me draw Wolverine, but I hate drawing Wolverine.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's not going to happen. You're going to be fighting upstream the whole time.
Yeah, that misaligned purpose that you're talking about. I see that a lot, and
Mhm.
I personally, I don't advocate for that concept of like you just doing things that get eyes on your artwork, because you're going to get led and pushed into something that you don't like to do, and that
Mhm.
you're going to burn out really hard and really fast. Like, I don't care how much attention that you get for it, like that is not sustainable. I've seen a lot of artists that have gone down the road, and I'm not bashing it, but just saying it, that have gone into like the not safe for work or furry anthro
Mhm.
kind of roads there. And there's real talk, like there's good money to be made in there. I've never dabbled in those waters before. I've never swam in them, but I happen to know people that do. And they didn't like it. They didn't fulfill it. They didn't feel fulfilled by it, rather. And that's something that you, as an artist, like you really gotta tackle with every single time you're gonna do something for somebody else or for yourself too, friend, is like, you got to think about like, what does this bring to me and what am I bringing to the world? And as far as like what you can do, what you can charge, or what your economic worth is going to be, is that your value is a reflection of the value that you will bring other people. And that's just, again, like that might sound real woo wooey and stuff, but it's just real talk. And I think that there's a lot of bigger business people that will support that thesis, like your Gary V, or I can't think of anymore. Like Tony
Mhm.
Robbins will tell you that too.
Yeah.
That value is just a reflection of the value that you create in the world.
Yeah. Being gifted doesn't mean that we get more. It means that we get to give more. And that's a very spiritual thing. And
Mhm.
for some reason we've disconnected from that aspect of things. And like we said this whole podcast, like when we look at the market and we try to put the market first,
Mhm.
then it's always going to fall short. It's always going to be a pale imitation of what somebody else is doing. But when you really try to focus in on connecting with that source of creativity that's inside of you, like what do you really love? then you will find that it will synchronistically bring you things in ways it is that you wouldn't have expected.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I fully concur with that. I
Yeah.
definitely do.
So,
The more that you reach towards what
mhm,
you want to do and you do so with less fear, the more opportunities life's going to bring you.
absolutely. Yeah. So we can follow you on the Art Mentor at YouTube. You wanna give us a rundown on your socials?
Yeah, sure. So I'm all over Instagram. I have a TikTok. I'm going to say that I post there somewhat recently. I more so just really like to watch really funny and cringy things there that are just a good old time. But big time, I'm most active on obviously my YouTube. Like I'll post there every single day, not a video, but I'll at least run polls and stuff because I like to interact with my community there. I also have a Discord server as well. I run monthly art challenges. Got a great bustling little community happen up over there too. You can always find the links to that. I put those strictly in my videos though. And then obviously on Instagram, the Art Mentor, TikTok, the Art Mentor, and you can also find me on DeviantArt, which is just my name, Sean Bianchi.
Cool, man. I'm gonna include all your links as well as my links in the description below. Thanks, guys, for watching, and have a good night.
Thanks, man.